Hello, and welcome to episode 24 of
Mo Money,
the Investing Show for Millennials by Millennial, where our goal is to educate, entertain, and empower a new generations of investors. I am, of course, the host for this wonderful series that is celebrating 6 months. A lot of education has been sponged up, so for all of those who've been supporting and watching, I thank you so much. Here's to 6 more and beyond. So let's get the show rolling with the
Mo Money Market Update.
Market started pretty flatline last week, hovering around 2100 mark in a short trading week, still reacting to the news from Brexit until Friday. The big news was the non-farm jobs report. The number blew estimates out of the water, which saw a large jump in the market of 1.35%. The market took the news as a good indicator for the economy. The large jump saw the S&P 500 hit a high of 2131, less than a point away from the all-time high set back last May. Now, just today, upon good news from the market overseas, including Japan, market running up 4%, the S&P 500 hit a new
all-time high.
Goddamn, what a time to be alive. 2139.34. Great news for all of the bulls in the market. Now, this week, we're going to be talking about money. People always ask me, why are you always talking about money? Because I like money, bitch. Yeah. Sorry, that was a Puff Daddy reference. Where does money come from? Who makes the money? And who controls the money? Now, you may have heard me talk about the Federal Reserve before. You may have heard me call them evil, call them stupid, call them scary, etc. But I never actually described what they are, who they are, and where they came. That is this week's topic, which is actually going to be a 2-part series. This week, we will discuss the foundation of central banks and the Federal Reserve. Next week, we will discuss the Federal Reserve in its current role and how it's viewed in today's society. First, as always, let us start with a history lesson, because you have to know why these organizations were established to understand why they're still around today. First, we have to travel all the way back to 1690 Europe. During this time, the Great 9 Years' War was being fought between most of Europe and France. It was pretty much between France and England, countries that still pretty much hate each other to this day. So in 1690, France kicks the shit out of England in a naval battle and pretty much destroys them. So King William III is like, oh shit, that's not good. We have to rebuild the navy. But there was one giant problem. They have no money. And he wasn't doing a very good job of instilling confidence in his people because they just watched him get his ass handed to him by the French. So his credit was pretty much zero. His credit was about on par with a crackhead. The words of Notorious B.I.G., if you think a crackhead's paying you back shit, forget it. So a rich Scottish dude by the name of William Patterson was like, hey, looks like you got some money problems. I have some money. I can help you out. King William desperately agreed, thus establishing the Bank of England, which, unlike the name suggested, was a privately owned corporation that lent money to the king and was allowed to create currency. This is the template to all central banks across the world. So fast forward about 80 years and you have England having just got their ass kicked again in war, and the United States is formed. The United States had 3 central banks before the Federal Reserve, or just the Fed, which I'll refer to them as. Central banks are the main institutions that control the monetary supply, currency, and interest rates of government. First, we go to the early years of the United States. 1782, Confederation Congress creates the Bank of North America to help finance the later years of the Revolutionary War. Then in 1791, Congress creates the first Bank of the United States. Not the first bank in the United States, but that was its name. It was owned by the government and private shareholders. The 4 goals of the bank, in Alexander Hamilton's words, were to have the U.S. government assume all state debts incurred from the war, pay off war debts, raise capital for the government, and create a standardized currency. The bank lasted for 20 years until it lost its charter. The U.S. government eventually sells its 20% share in the bank, making it entirely privately owned by wealthy U.S. bankers and Europeans. In 1811, the bank loses its charter when it's voted down by the Senate because of the public resistance of the bank because of its foreign-owned shareholders. Then 6 years later, you have the United States again in disarray and economic turmoil, having just come out of a victory against stupid old England. James Madison signs a bill creating the second bank of the United States, again to help them pay off debts, create a currency, and bring economic stability. Again, it was 20% owned by the government, it was answerable to the Congress, and had to go under inspection from the Treasury Department. The second bank faced a lot of opposition, especially from then President Jackson. President Jackson was fiercely against the bank and saw them as evil men set out to enslave the United States. Jackson absolutely hated debt and he hated banks. 1832, Congress decided to reinstate the bank's charter 4 years earlier than previously designated. The Congress and the banks, both of which were pretty like, fuck this Jackson guy, felt if they pushed for an extension of the charter now, Jackson would not dare veto it because it would cost him the upcoming election. The renewal was led by Senator Henry Clay, who was embarking on a presidential campaign, which was partly being funded by then president of the bank, Nicholas Biddle. Jackson, Mr. Bold, Brash, and Fearless, said, nah, fuck that, and vetoed it. He wrote veto, veto, veto all over the renewal charter like a young girl does her first crush. He saw this bill as the bank's attempt to seize control over the government. The veto did not lead to his losing of the next election. He actually ran on the platform, Jackson and no bank. He did a lot of awful shitty things as president, but this was pretty badass. So the bank was on its way to lose its charter within the next 4 years, but Jackson chose not to wait that long. While Congress was away for the summer recess, he chose to take a bold action. Jackson actually started attempting to remove all the government's money from the bank, but none of his treasury secretaries would do it. So what do you do when someone doesn't do what you want them to do, you get rid of them. Not like get rid of them as in you kill them, you just fire them, you know. And he fired 2 guys who refused to do it until he found a 3rd who would do it. Why he didn't just ask the 2nd guy if he would do it when he hired him, I don't know. Anyways, Jackson started to remove all the money and place them in a group of state-chartered banks instead, as well as routing all new money coming from payments to these banks as well. After re-election, he declared he'd end the national debt, which he did. He sold off a bunch of the government's land in the West and reduced the USA's debt to absolutely nothing. Zero. The vetoing of the bank caused angry investors overseas to start withdrawing their money from the United States. Foreign governments started to cut the credit of the United States and demand hard currency like gold and silver, etc. in exchange for the imports. This caused a severe depression in the economy, rising prices and interest rates. It was called the Panic of 1837. For the next 70 years or so, the banking system was just kind of a wild, wild west of state banks, all issuing their own currencies. Some were backed by hard money, some were not. It was a time of a lot of bank failures and depressions. The rise of the Industrial Revolution saw a large increase in factories and corporations, all who had a need for capital that many of the banks were unable to supply. So instead of tapping into foreign banks, there arose investment banks. These banks were able to act as brokers to allow corporations and investors to meet and exchange capital for shares. The investment banking sector became very consolidated between JP Morgan and a few others. These guys pretty much dominated the financial sector and pretty much had the entire economy by the balls. They could do with it whatever they pleased. 1907, a range of different economic factors led to a panic and a run on the banks. There was the earthquake in San Francisco and an attempt to corner the steel market, which had failed by the Heinz family. This led to a failure of their company and their brokerage house. A bank they owned used the company's shares as collateral, so that bank went under as well. There was a man by the name of Charles T. Barney who worked for a bank called the Knickerbocker Trust Company, one of the largest trust companies in the nation. Barney was also a former associate of the Heinz family. This past association sparked concern by depositors of the Knickerbocker Company. Barney was forced to resign from his position in the company. That very day, the National Bank of Commerce, the clearinghouse, remember we talked about clearinghouses last week, they announced they no longer served the bank. Interestingly, the clearinghouse was heavily influenced by JP Morgan, the big kahuna of the banking world. Days later, there was a run on the Knickerbocker Trust Company, forcing it to suspend its operations. And within 2 days, 10 other banks within the city of New York had failed when plagued by runs as well. The Knickerbocker Trust Company soon went under. JP Morgan, with the help of some bankers, including J.D. Rockefeller and the Treasury Department Secretary, started depositing their money and government money into the Trust Company of America, a company that they felt was sound enough to instill confidence in the public and prevent more bank runs. Also, New York City itself faced bankruptcy. JP Morgan had to step in and provide liquidity to the city government. At the end of the day, JP Morgan came out looking like a hero for saving the whole banking system and the economy. But soon after, the Pujo Committee gathered evidence and wrote a scathing report about Morgan and other banks about their money monopolies and concentrated wealth and power. The public started to turn on Morgan and the banks and demanded that something be done. Senator Nelson Aldrich was head of the National Monetary Commission, which had the job of investigating the panic of 1907 and propose banking solutions. He was sent to Europe for 2 years to learn from the banking system there and found one major difference: a central bank. Aldrich held a secret meeting in November 1911 at the Jekyll Island Club off the coast of Georgia with some of the leading bankers of the day. They designed the plan for regulating the banks. So you had bankers creating a plan to regulate the bank. That's a thing that happened. Okay, that's like making criminals the judges at their own court cases. Anyways, the debate raged in Congress for 2 years about the plan that they presented. The public supported the plan for banking reform. It passed the House and the Senate, and late in the night, December 23rd, 1913, while most of Congress was away for the Christmas holiday, President Woodrow Wilson signed into law the Federal Reserve Act. That's where we'll leave off on this week's episode. That is a large but general overview of the important history of the U.S. banking system that led to the creation of the Federal Reserve. Next week, we'll be discussing the Federal Reserve, its composition, and its functions in today's economic system. They control your money, its worth, its creation, and everything, so you're not going to want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching another episode. You know we will be here every Friday unless something comes up like this week with another episode. For now, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with everybody. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Like me on Facebook.
Mo Money signing out.